Well, this is not a great sign for Kansas City. Not that this next story will be anything that shocks you, but it will be a disappointing story. And it comes courtesy of Missouri Floor Majority Leader Cindy O'Loughlin. She posted on her Facebook page this last night, and I just shared it on our Facebook page or my personal Facebook page, Pete Mundo on KCMO Talk Radio. You can see it there. She writes here, I'm a big Kansas City fan. 2 of the boys live there. I assume that means her sons. Shopping and restaurants are great, and there's also plays, concerts, you name it. So this weekend, there was a fall festival in the Power and Light District. Streets blocked off, entertainment for families. I know this because one of the boys was there with a friend and a 3-year-old child enjoying the fun. Out of nowhere comes a bunch of about 40 teenagers, turning tables over, tearing tents down, and destroying things in their path, and throwing bricks. Kansas City is the site of the next World Cup. Visitors from around the world will be coming to Missouri. There's also continued talk of the Royals locating downtown. Missourians watch other cities get torn down by thugs who appear to not suffer any punishment. The people of Missouri cannot and will not accept a failure to keep the streets safe for our citizens and visitors. This is not a progressive state, and it concerns me greatly to hear of such lawlessness. I'll be in Kansas City next week at some point, and I hope to gain a better understanding of how this has been allowed to happen and what is being done about it. There are too many good people in Kansas City and this state to let its reputation be destroyed. When families cannot enjoy an evening at a fall festival, then it's time to make changes. Now, this is the first I'm hearing about this. If you knew otherwise, you can let us know at 913-408-7957. But I did not hear about anything like this happening downtown over the weekend. Maybe you did, maybe you experienced it. I certainly saw absolutely nothing from our local media on this, whether it's that they didn't know, whether it's that the city, I don't want to say covered it up, but certainly was not going to be out there bragging about whatever happened down at Power and Light over the weekend. I don't know the answer. I just know this much. For those of us who live here, who call it home, is anybody going to sit there and say they're shocked by this behavior? How could you possibly come to that conclusion? None of this is shocking. None of this is surprising. In fact, all you've seen in the last several years is an emboldened criminal class in Kansas City who feels like the rules and the laws don't apply to them and will never apply to them. And then when you look at this, if you're John Sherman and you're the owner of the Kansas City Royals and you want to move your team that's coming off a great playoff run to a new ballpark downtown, I get it. You think that's a place where you can drive commerce, you can drive economic activity, you can own restaurants and hotels and office space. But ask yourself this if you're John Sherman. Do you trust your local elected leaders to set up a safe situation for your business and your potential customers, meaning the fans? Do you have confidence in that right now? And if the answer is not immediately, no doubt about it, no questions asked, yes, then what are you doing? You're going to invest $1 to $2 billion in a place that you're not convinced you've got the right leadership in place to keep the people safe? How could you possibly come to that conclusion? Or at the very least, how could you possibly not think about it more and say, maybe this isn't the best place for us right now? Maybe I can't trust a location like Jackson County, like downtown Kansas City, Missouri right now. And I'm not saying this to knowingly and wantingly soil the reputation or knock politicians in Kansas City, Missouri. I'm just asking this from a business perspective. How could you possibly come to that conclusion right now? When this story from Cindy O'Loughlin drops on her Facebook page late last night, it came down at about 9 o'clock. I had it sent to me early this morning by somebody who is friends with Cindy O'Loughlin, and I just posted it once again on my Facebook page, Pete Mundo on KCMO. And I'm like, well, this got no media attention. No one's talking about this. And I'm reading some of your comments right now on the Facebook page. Alan writes, great job, Mayor Lucas. This is on you. Wayne writes, this is why we need to elect Tracy Chappell as Jackson County prosecutor. Bud writes here a couple of minutes ago, too bad a citizen or two didn't knock a few of them down. Yeah, where's Joe Biden to show up with corn pop? He was a bad dude. They'll take care of business down there. Aaron writes, it's time to have a major cleanup. It begins with leadership in the city council, the mayor's office. KC is too quickly turning into St. Louis. Well, we've got a ways to go to become St. Louis. Let's not put ourselves in that boat just yet. But obviously the trends are not positive. The only thing you can look at when it comes to crime in this town right now and be positive about is that homicides are technically down by about 25 year to date, which is a good sign. So homicides are down 20% year to date. That's good. But non-fatal shootings are up nearly 20%. So what that tells me is that the aim from the criminals is not as good as it was 1 year ago. I don't know if they got to get their eyes checked. I don't know what's going on, but the aim is off. That's unfortunately the only obvious conclusion to come to. But when you have state leaders in Missouri politics calling out what's going on here in Kansas City, that becomes very problematic. Cindy O'Loughlin added in a Facebook post last night after the one I just read to you, she added this. In a conversation with Mike Kehoe, the lieutenant governor, and of course he is running to be the next governor of Missouri. He probably will be the next governor in Missouri. In a conversation with Mike Kehoe, he mentioned Nashville and how they have beefed up law enforcement, implemented pay to attract officers in, and are keeping streets safe for their citizens. One of his top priorities is public safety and backing law enforcement. You will be hearing about this and seeing changes, and we will support him 100%. Well, I'm curious to hear about that. We know that Mike Kehoe has the backing of law enforcement. We know that Cops for Kehoe was a pack and a group here in Kansas City. So we know the cops have Kehoe's back. That's great. But the question remains, what exactly can they do? How are they going to recruit? I will give the Kansas City, Missouri City Council this. They gave the police department what they wanted in the recent budget negotiations, over $300 million. So what are they doing to recruit? And technically, that's on the police department. What are they doing to recruit, to have a bigger presence at places like fall festivals happening downtown? What are they doing? I don't think that's an unreasonable question to ask. And nobody backs the cops in this town in media more than I do in this show. But is there new creative ways that they're getting out there and they're trying to recruit people to the job? I'm not saying it's easy, but you got the money you wanted, right? So now it's fair to look at it and say, how are you getting people onto the job? And one thing I do hear a lot of is, well, it's very difficult to get people onto the job because, well, they don't trust the prosecutor. Well, that's where the political games are coming into play. Because you have a Democrat, Melissa Johnson, who is Quentin Lucas's handpicked prosecutor to replace Gene Peters Baker, versus a Republican in Tracy Chappell. And what I hear from a lot of people on the political side in law enforcement is, well, Tracy can't win. And maybe she can't. Maybe it's just too much of an uphill climb for a Republican to win countywide in Jackson County, even though Gene Peters Baker, the current prosecutor, has completely destroyed in large part trust from law enforcement in the prosecutor's office. Maybe it's still not enough. But if you're going to sit there with your hands on the sidelines and not do anything about it, and then just complain and complain and complain, then you know what? There's got to be some adult that steps up. And maybe that adult needs to be Governor Mike Kehoe. Maybe that's it. Because there's too many political games being played around here as far as I can tell. And in the meantime, businesses suffer, families suffer, innocent victims and everyday Kansas Cityans suffer, while nobody apparently wants to step to the plate. On the text line, which is 913-408-7957. Hey, Pete, where were all the social workers at? Yeah, that's a very good point. Where I do not know. We'll have to find out. Also on the text line, Power and Light has lots of issues, but city officials and police make sure that none of it gets out in public. You know, I don't get down there a ton, but when I do, I haven't seen anything obvious as of late, but I admit I'm not there with regularity anymore. I used to live right around the corner, but not anymore.
Some of the social workers may be at the rent strike. Maybe.
With the tenants, folks? That's right.
Yeah.
Oh, brother. Quentin Lucas can't help himself. I want to be like, bro, go to work. Clock in. Stop arguing with my followers and listeners on X. Just do yourself a favor. Trust me, I stop sometimes. And, technically, that's what I'm supposed to be doing. Interacting with people all day on the show. And then after the show, on Facebook, on X, on Instagram, wherever. You can find me in all three of those places at Pete Mundo. But at some point, I just throw my hands up and I'm like, I'm done. I can't argue all day. Just can't do it. But he's just continuing to go back and forth on X with people. And, I appreciate it. It's good for the engagement, as they like to say.
Just waiting for the streetcar.
Yeah.
Just ain't got time.
Maybe that's it. He's waiting for the streetcar, John.
Yep.
Well done. Very nice work. But he just can't help himself. And what I'm referring to here is a post from Missouri Senate floor leader Cindy O'Loughlin, who said her sons who live here in Kansas City, were down at Power and Light over the weekend. And they were there with friends, 3-year-olds, little kids all over the place. And 40 teenagers out of nowhere start turning tables over, tearing down tents, destroying things, throwing bricks. And did local media cover this? Did you hear about this? Oh.
I missed it.
Yeah. John missed it, and John reads every local news story known to mankind in this town, which is a heavy lift. But amazingly, this did not make the cut. Makes you wonder why. 913-408-7957. So now that I've blown this thing up, or we've blown this thing up with your help on social media and on this show, let's see if there's any digging today from our local news outlets. Cindy is in Kansas City at 913-408-7957. Cindy, good morning.
Good morning. You were right on about everything you said about prosecutors, et cetera, et cetera. But what you missed was the root cause of all of these problems, and that's the lack of parenting and community involvement. And, the police are not responsible for crime. They go when there is crime, but they're not responsible for it. So we have to figure out the root cause, and we have to help parents do better. We wouldn't have this crime. I mean, this woman said they were teens. So teens have parents. So that's the problem. If my kids were gone and I didn't know where they were, I'd be finding them.
Yep.
And, it's not the police's responsibility. It's just not. And I think that, this whole local control thing, if people would just look back, and I don't ever hear anything about this, and it'd be great if you would do a segment on it, of Pendergast. This is why we don't have local control in Kansas City, because we have an inept city council. And I, for one, certainly don't want them responsible for our police department.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Cindy, thank you very much. And your words are well said, and I agree. Cops, what they can do is, if your staff is fully forced or fully employed, you can have a presence in certain parts of town that may deter certain criminal activity. But you're right. They're not babysitters. It's not their job to be babysitters. So at the core of it is the lack of parenting. But if you're a public official, yes, you can develop programs and you can go rah-rah dad. And I will give Quentin Lucas credit. About a month ago, we had a very good conversation about how parents, and listen, he said it, I said it, parents in the urban core are failing. Dads, in particular, are failing kids. Fatherless homes make you infinitely more likely, and we've gone through the numbers, I don't have them in front of me right now, but infinitely more likely to end up in prison when you're in a home without a father. All that is absolutely true. It's undeniable. So now you look at it and you say, okay, we don't have the parenting, but that is nothing that you can necessarily fix today. You just can't. Like, these kids are running amok. Dads, in many cases, in too many cases, aren't around. What can you actually do? All you can do is try to create a system where kids fear, or teenagers or anybody, fear breaking the law. that's what you can do if you are a public official, if you are a prosecutor, if you run a police department. That's where you can right now make an impact. You're not going to eliminate crime, but you're at least going to put yourself in a position where you're doing everything in your power, where young people know, if I act a fool, man, I'm going to a place that I don't want to be. So we can talk all day about, hey, the cultural issues are this and the parenting issues are that. But in the end, an elected official is there for 4 or 8 years. They're not fixing that rot that's going to take generations to turn around.
No, you've got that right. And I certainly feel for the single parent out there who's trying to, but they're out there. They got to do a job to keep the rent paid.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so when boys get about 10, 11, 12, they start to make up stuff to do, and it only takes one to go, hey, why don't we ... And you got an instant little following, right?
Yeah.
So it's partly with boys and getting to a certain age, right? But at the same time, when you say, how come I'm in this situation where my one income is the only thing I have to get by, think about who you're voting for.
Well, bingo.
So bringing that all full circle.
Bringing it all full circle. You are right about that. All those things are true. And on the text line as well, Pete, Kansas City overlooks low-level law enforcement, expired tags, temp tags, traffic law enforcement. Yeah, all that stuff matters. I'm not saying that we want the cop who's busting you going 34 and a 30. Like, no one likes that cop, okay? But if you got a temp tag that's a year old, like, okay, let's do something about that. Let's have some standards. Those things can be done. But you do have police officers who are like, why am I going out of my way right now? In this town, with the people in charge, why am I going above and beyond? And I hate to say that that's something we should accept because we shouldn't, but human nature is real. And I can't sit here and blame those folks for looking at the fact that one of their colleagues is sitting now in prison for a year as of last week, in Eric DeValcanair. And you got a prosecutor who's more interested in going after cases like that than the criminals in Kansas City. And some of you might say that's too strong, but I don't think it is. I mean, unless it's a high-profile case, I don't see Gene Peters Baker's office bragging about all the bad guys they're throwing in prison. I wish they would. I wish they would get a little tougher, but I don't see that happening in this town. 913-408-7957. That's the text line as well. Pete, all the kids learned well from the summer of love. That would be a reference to 2020. I don't think we can understate how much 2020, and I don't just mean the summer of love, but I mean COVID, kids out of school, kids falling through the cracks, getting involved with bad people and bad things because they were told they couldn't go to school, which for kids in rough neighborhoods, school is the biggest sense of normalcy they have. They don't have moms sitting at home like in, the Blue Valley School District teaching them math and science and reading on their $2,000 MacBook Pro. They don't. They've got a single parent in too many cases. Mom's working a couple jobs, trying to pay the rent, trying to pay the bills. And what happens? Young men get out on the streets and they go looking for other young men to bond with. And I don't think it's a coincidence that we've seen a major uptick in teenagers acting like fools 4 years after COVID, when they would have been early teens or right in that formative age, when typically you want to get your head on straight, John.
Yeah, the normalcy is the structure, right?
Yeah.
You got to be here at a certain time. Regardless of the topics being taught, there's at least I'm here at a certain time. I move on to the next class or what have you. Day starts here, day ends here. I get some lunch. It's the structure that's needed, that's missing because of single parents that can't do everything and be everywhere at once.
And think about it, too. You're more likely to see good male role models in that school, whether it's a teacher, whether it's a coach, whether it's an administrator.
Yep.
You're more likely to see that good male role model in your life than you are sitting at home.